Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make patterns, make seat patterns from existing pattern pieces like this. So to make your own pattern pieces you first need the existing pattern piece. In this case this pattern piece is of a 1972 Volkswagen Beetle front seat. Some chalk pastels or some Taylor's chalk. I prefer using these because they don't scratch the vinyl, but as Taylor chalk tends to. Some scissors, ideally good fabric scissors or just some really sharp scissors, and a ruler that measures inches. So yeah, this one measures inches. Step one is just to trace around the existing pattern piece. Don't add on a seam allowance at this point, we'll do that in the next step. So just draw around your existing pattern piece onto your chosen fabric. In this case it's some thicker black vinyl. But yeah, just draw around your pattern piece onto the right side of the vinyl with your chalk pastel or Taylor's chalk. I've just drawn around this pattern piece with my white chalk pastel. It's not exactly like the pattern piece as you can see it there, but it's close enough for what we're doing. So the next step is to get your ruler, measure out 1/2 inch. That's the seam allowance we're using. So that will be around there. You just draw another line 1/2 inch everywhere except this bottom piece. Now I've drawn a series of dashes 1/2 inch away from the inside of that original line. So I'm just going to draw between those dashes. Like that. Just so we've got a seam allowance on the piece. The reason why I didn't draw here is because on the original piece it's folded over and we need to figure out how much it's folded over by, and we need to figure out the size of this piece of cardboard which reinforces the seat slightly. So that will be the next step after we've drawn this seam allowance line. So as you can see by this measurement here, it's a 3/4 inch turnover, and I've just finished drawing this cut line here, so I'm just going to add the 3/4 inch turnover underneath here. So I've just added the 3/4 inch turnover here. As you can see, I have a shape very similar to the original piece. You might notice that the 1/2 inch I've drawn on mine isn't exactly the same as this seam allowance here. That's because I work in bigger seam allowances than the seat makers in the original factories would have done. If I just measure that here, I believe that's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Yeah, it's a lot less than half. I work in a bigger seam allowance, so in case I mess it up, I have a little bit more fabric to play with. I advise anyone who's just starting out doing any upholstery or any sewing to use a larger seam allowance. You can always make a large piece of fabric smaller. You can't make a small piece of fabric bigger. So now all that's left to do is to cut out along the green line, along the larger line. It doesn't matter if you're slightly to the outside of this line due to the thickness of the line. You can always trim off excess later. Like here, I can trim off this bit after I've cut out the rest of the piece. So now that I've done one piece, I can repeat this process on this other Volkswagen piece here and on this other piece of the chair. I can just use the same pattern making and pattern cutting process for each of the other two pieces. I got this other side piece traced and cut out off camera. Now it's time to do this back piece of the chair. So you've got two sides, one back, and the front of this chair is in basket weave, and I'm going to do that in my own basket weave. So I'm not going to trace this onto the plain vinyl because it doesn't need to be traced onto the plain vinyl. So it's just this other piece to go. So on these larger pieces, you need to have the centre of the piece marked so you have something for the other pieces to line up with. So on this back piece, you have to have the centre marked so you have somewhere to line up the front piece. So I'm just going to mark that on the actual piece taken off from the seat. So how I do that is I just fold the piece I took off the beetle in half and then just put a mark at the centre top of the thing and the centre bottom. So then I'm going to open it out, put it on my vinyl. Don't worry about which way round you put your pieces on the vinyl. It could be this way, it could be like this, it could be this way. Vinyl does not have a grain like most fabrics do. Vinyl is a synthetic fabric and it's non-woven, so that means it does not have a grain. It won't stretch in one particular way rather than another one. So I'm just going to trace around this piece. Trace around it like this. Now you'll notice there is a rather large tear here. I'm just going to ignore that for now. I'm just going to trace around the piece like so. If you have a piece that won't lay flat on your chosen vinyl or your chosen fabrics, get a hairdryer or a heat gun and just like very slowly and very, very carefully just apply some heat to the vinyl or the piece that you've just taken off your seat. It just helps having the heat there, you can just press it a little bit flatter and it just helps the whole piece lay just that little bit flatter on your fabric or vinyl when you're cutting out. So here's my rather large tear. I don't know if you can see that. Here it is. You're just going to hold it. You could tape it if you're not feeling very confident. Just tape it to the existing piece. But I know with this tear, nothing's been taken out between the two pieces of fabric, so I can just hold it like that. And you're just going to trace around every element, marking your centre pieces, marking your centre of the top centre of the fabric and the bottom centre of the fabric. So after you've finished tracing the back of this seat, this is what it should look like. You should have your line of the original fabric, your centre bottom marked, your centre top marked. There should be a line all the way around the piece that you've just taken out. Now I'm going to mark my 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to do that in a contrasting colour just so I know which line's which. You don't have to do it in the contrasting colour if you don't have a contrasting colour. Now if you don't have a different coloured piece of chalk. But I just like to do it in a contrasting colour. So I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch all the way around here. Now remember, the 1/2 inch starts from the inside of the first line that you've just drawn, not the outside. If you start it from the outside of a thick chalk line, you can very potentially get a very large seat cover. 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. Now for the bottom of this piece of fabric, you'll see there's a small turnover and a little channel has been sewn into it. This is where the wire was if you watched my previous video. So what you want to do is you want to measure how large this is. I just measured it and it's 1/2 inch. So, and as my seam allowance was already 1/2 inch, I'm just going to draw that line in a different colour so I know not to sew that bit onto another piece of fabric. So this is what your drawn pattern piece should look like. I'm just going to cut that out off camera because it will take me a while. And then we'll move on to the basket weave. So as it turns out, I don't have quite enough basket weave to cut out this big bit. However, I do need to cut out this little piece in basket weave anyway, so I'm going to just go ahead and do that. So if you look at my basket weave compared to the original basket weave, you'll notice that it is slightly different. It's more of an isometric shape. So there's one sort of weavy bit that way, one going that way and one going straight down, whereas in the original basket weave it's just that way and that way. It's just left to right and up and down. I wanted my card to have a little bit of a different look, but I just wanted it to be subtle rather than like changing the colour of the fabric or anything. So I just much prefer this one in comparison to this one. But you don't have to have basket weave like this. You could have it like the original, or you could just use a contrast piece of fabric or vinyl. So I've just used the same technique as on the larger piece from the back of the seat. On the plain fabric, I just used the same technique for cutting out the pattern onto the vinyl. I drew around the original pattern piece and then I added 1/2 inch. Then I measured how big that turnover is. Then I transferred that onto there in a contrasting colour so I know not to join this bit onto another piece of fabric. So the reason I advise you to use chalk pastel or like tailor's chalk is because it marks the vinyl really, really well. So you can see most of those lines. See? And you can get it off fairly easily. You can just rub it with your finger, or you could run a microfiber cloth over it. Get most of those lines out. And any stubborn marks, you can use a vinyl and rubber cleaner. It doesn't have to be the Autoglym brand ones, other brands are available. You can just spray it on and rub it with your cloth. And there's significantly fewer chalk marks. The reason I don't advise you to use tailor's chalk is because it actually scratches the vinyl. Don't know if you can see here, but this is from the lines I embroidered into another piece of the vinyl. And you can see where it's scratched. It's actually scratched the vinyl. And if you're doing a seat for yourself or for a customer, you don't want scratched vinyl because you can see that on the finished product. So there you have it. There's all of my pieces cut out here. This is the back part of the seat in plain vinyl. This is one of the upright parts of the seats in plain vinyl. This is the other side, and this is the bottom of the seat. Again, I'm just going to order some more basket weave for the front part because I didn't quite have enough. So I'm going to order that and cut that out off camera when I eventually get it. And then I will do a video sewing everything together. That'll be episode 3. This is episode 2.